Commander Jace Harper stood at the viewport of his shuttle, watching as Alara 3 grew from a distant star to a sprawling orbital installation. The diplomatic station resembled a massive snowflake, with radiating arms spinning gently to create artificial gravity in the residential sections, while the central hub remained in zero-G for species with different physiological needs. 10 minutes to docking, Commander, his pilot announced. Nervous? Jace adjusted the formal collar of his Earth Diplomatic Corps uniform, suppressing a grimace. After 15 years as a Marine before his diplomatic training, he still found the stiff, ceremonial attire restrictive. Not nervous, he replied, just aware of the stakes. The pilot nodded knowingly. The tensions between the Dyrenian coalition and the Vokan hegemony had been building for decades. Their territorial disputes across 3 star systems had already led to military skirmishes. Earth and several other neutral worlds had pushed for this summit as a final attempt to prevent full-scale interstellar war. Well, if anyone can navigate this mess, it's you, sir, the pilot said with more confidence than Jace felt. Your work on the Proxima treaties was legendary. Jace made a non-committal sound. The Proxima negotiations had been between human colonies. This was different. Species with entirely different evolutionary histories, value systems, and ways of perceiving reality. The potential for misunderstanding was astronomical. The shuttle slipped into one of Alara 3's docking bays with barely a tremor. As the airlock cycled, Jace gathered the ceremonial case containing Earth's peace proposal and the cultural exchange gifts he'd been advised to bring. The items inside had been carefully selected by xenocultural specialists to appeal to the various delegations. Remember, he muttered to himself, recalling the briefing. Gift exchange precedes formal negotiations for both primary parties. The airlock hissed open, and Jace stepped onto the station. The reception committee waiting for him consisted of a diverse group of beings. In the center stood a tall, willowy figure with iridescent skin that shifted between purple and blue tones. Ambassador Niara of the Dyrenians inclined her elongated head in greeting, the movement causing ripples through the tentacle-like appendages that served as her hair. Commander Harper, she said, her translator rendering her musical language into crisp English. We welcome Earth's voice to our gathering of worlds. Beside her stood a stockier figure with thick, leathery gray skin and 4 arms folded in what Jace recognized as a formal posture. Security Chief Takar of the station's neutral peacekeeping force observed him with unblinking yellow eyes. Commander, Takar acknowledged, less warmly. Your credentials and scanning are complete. We trust you've brought no unauthorized technology or biological material. Jace recognized the implied suspicion. Rumors about human unpredictability had spread since their relatively recent arrival on the interstellar scene. Only what protocol permits, Jace assured him, indicating his case. And the goodwill of Earth. Takar made a guttural sound that didn't translate, but Jace's cultural training suggested skepticism. Ambassador Niara intervened smoothly. The opening ceremonies begin in 2 station cycles. Translator Minister Vela will show you to your quarters and brief you on procedural adjustments. A small, almost childlike being with overlarge eyes and scaled skin stepped forward. Despite the diminutive size, Jace knew the Therians were among the oldest spacefaring races present. This way, Earth Envoy, Vela said. There have been 17 protocol modifications since your departure from your homeworld. Jace suppressed a groan. 17 changes meant 17 new ways he could inadvertently cause offense. As they walked through the station's sweeping corridors, he noted the careful environmental accommodations for different species, humidity controls, varying light spectrums, and gravity adjustments in different sections. The gift exchange ceremony has been moved forward, Vela explained, as they entered a residential wing. It will now occur during the welcome reception, rather than after the preliminary statements. Jace nodded. That's actually helpful. Less time for tensions to build. Perhaps, Vela said, with what sounded like doubt. Though the Vocan delegation has objected twice to the revision, that wasn't surprising. The Vocan hegemony, with their hierarchical, militaristic culture, preferred rigid adherence to established protocols. Any change would be viewed with suspicion. Will Admiral Zor be attending the reception? Jace asked, referring to the notorious Vocan military observer, whose hawkish stance had escalated several previous negotiations. Affirmative. All principal parties will be present, which is why security measures have been enhanced. Vela gestured to Jace's quarters, a Spartan but comfortable suite, adapted for human physiology. The reception begins in 6 hours. I recommend physiological rest and review of the protocol updates I've transmitted to your station terminal. After Vela departed, Jace spent 3 hours studying the protocol changes, noting with concern the increasing restrictions on physical contact between delegates. Apparently, a minor incident between a Vocan aide and a Dyrenian cultural attaché had heightened sensitivities about physical boundaries. The remaining time he used to carefully inspect the contents of his case, particularly the ceremonial gifts. The centerpiece was a specially commissioned replica of Ambassador Niara's prosthetic arm, an artistic recreation in precious metals and stones of the cybernetic limb she used after losing her natural appendage in a previous peacekeeping mission. The gift symbolized Earth's recognition of sacrifice in pursuit of harmony, a sentiment that cultural advisors assured him would resonate with both major delegations. When the time came, Jace changed into his formal diplomatic attire, midnight blue with silver accents, the colors chosen to appear neutral to both the primarily violet spectrum-sensitive Dyrenians and the infrared-sensitive Vocans. He secured the ceremonial case and made his way to the grand reception hall in the station's central hub. The hall was a marvel of xeno-architecture, with soaring transparent ceilings, revealing the star field beyond. Gravity was set to a compromise level, comfortable for most species, though Jace noticed several delegates wearing personal gravity compensators. The space was already filled with representatives from 24 worlds, their diverse forms creating a living tapestry of interstellar diversity. Jace took a steadying breath and entered. Almost immediately, Translator Minister Vela appeared at his side. Earth Envoy, the small being greeted him. I must inform you that the Vocan delegation has requested additional security scans of all ceremonial items. Jace frowned. That wasn't in your updates. The request was made 30 minutes ago. Chief Takar approved it, as a reasonable precaution. Jace recognized the political maneuvering. The Vocans were establishing dominance through security protocols. Fine. Where do I go? Vela led him to a scanning station where Security Chief Takar personally oversaw the procedure. The four-armed security chief regarded Jace with what he was beginning to recognize as perpetual suspicion. Your case, Commander, Takar said, extending one of his lower arms. Jace handed it over, watching closely as the security team ran various scanning devices over and through it. He knew the contents were harmless, but the scrutiny made him uneasy. The objects appear to be ceremonial in nature, one of the technicians reported. No detectable weapons, biological agents, or unauthorized technology. Takar seemed almost disappointed. Very well. You may proceed, Commander Harper, but the case remains here until the formal exchange. The gift exchange is scheduled to begin in 15 minutes, Vela reminded them both. Commander Harper will need access to his ceremonial objects. Then I will personally deliver them when the time comes, Takar insisted. Jace recognized he had little choice but to agree. Fine, but I'll need to inspect them before presentation to ensure they weren't damaged in scanning. The reception continued with Jace circulating among the delegates, engaging in the carefully choreographed small talk that preceded serious diplomacy. He noticed Admiral Zor watching him from across the room, a tall, powerfully built Vocan, with distinctive red markings on his gray skin that denoted high military rank. The admiral made no move to approach, which Jace took as a concerning sign. When the time for the gift exchange approached, Takar returned with Jace's case, as promised. Jace inspected the contents, relieved to find everything intact. The centerpiece, Ambassador Niara's arm replica, was particularly important. It had been crafted with meticulous attention to detail, from the iridescent metal that matched her skin tone to the intricate circuitry patterns that mimicked her actual prosthetic. A soft chime sounded, signaling the beginning of the ceremony. The delegates formed a loose circle in the center of the hall, with the Dyranian and Vulcan representatives taking prominent positions opposite each other. Jace stood at a neutral point between them, as Earth's status as mediator required. Ambassador Niara stepped forward first, her movements graceful, despite the artificial limb that replaced her right arm. In the tradition of peaceful gathering, we offer tokens of respect and recognition. She gestured, and her aides brought forward elaborate crystalline structures that seemed to capture and refract light in hypnotic patterns. These were presented to the Vulcan delegation with formal phrases that Jace's translator rendered as poetic expressions of hope for understanding. Admiral Zor accepted with rigid formality, offering in return what appeared to be ceremonial weapons, rendered unusable but symbolically powerful in Vulcan culture as tokens of trust. Then it was Earth's turn. Jace stepped forward, his heart rate increasing slightly as all eyes turned to him. He opened his case and carefully lifted out the replica arm, holding it upright to display the craftsmanship. The reaction was immediate and entirely unexpected. Gasps echoed through the hall. Several delegates physically recoiled. A security alert chimed softly as biometric sensors detected stress responses from multiple species. Confused, Jace froze in place, the replica arm held aloft. "Security breach!" Takar's voice boomed through the hall. "Containment Protocol Alpha!" Before Jace could process what was happening, security personnel swarmed toward him from all directions. The delegates scattered, some moving with surprising speed despite their varied physiologies. "Wait!" Jace tried to explain, but his voice was lost in the chaos. Two of Takar's security team reached him first, their weapons drawn. "Lower the biological object and place your appendages in a visible position," one of them demanded. "It's not biological," Jace insisted, still holding the replica. "It's a ceremonial gift, a replica of Ambassador Niara's prosthetic arm." The security officers exchanged confused glances, their weapons still trained on him. Takar pushed through the crowd, all four of his arms now holding different security devices. Scans show metallic composition," one of the officers reported. "But the configuration is consistent with potential weaponization." "It's art," Jace said through gritted teeth. "Part of Earth's cultural exchange." Ambassador Niara had not fled like many of the others. She approached cautiously, her translator conveying her words with a note of uncertainty. "You brought a dismembered limb as a peace offering?" The absurdity of the situation suddenly dawned on Jace. They thought he was holding a severed human arm. The replica's craftsmanship was so precise that, to those unfamiliar with human anatomy, it appeared he was casually displaying a detached body part. "No, Ambassador," he said as calmly as possible. "This is a replica, an artistic recreation of your cybernetic arm. It symbolizes Earth's recognition of your sacrifice in previous peace efforts." The tension in the room didn't dissipate. If anything, the confusion seemed to increase. "But humans do not have detachable limbs," Takar stated, as if explaining something obvious. "Your appendages are permanently affixed." "Correct," Jace confirmed. "This isn't my arm. It's not anyone's arm. It's a sculpture, an artistic representation." Translator Minister Vela had made her way to Jace's side and was examining the replica with enormous eyes. "I believe there is a cultural misunderstanding," she announced to the room. The Earth envoy has created an artistic simulacrum, not a biological specimen. Some of the delegates who had fled began to cautiously return. Curiosity, overcoming fear. Admiral Zor, however, pushed forward with aggressive purpose. "This is a deliberate provocation," the Vokan military leader declared. "Humans are well aware of the sacred nature of bodily integrity in both our cultures. To present what appears to be a severed limb is either profound ignorance or calculated insult." Jace felt the diplomatic situation deteriorating by the second. "Admiral, I assure you—" "The human brings weapons disguised as body parts," Admiral Zor continued, addressing the crowd rather than Jace. "This confirms what the hegemony has suspected. Earth seeks to destabilize our peace process through biological intimidation." The accusation was so absurd that Jace momentarily lost his diplomatic composure. "That's ridiculous. It's an art piece. A gift." "Then explain why your security scans concealed its true nature," Admiral Zor demanded. "They didn't," Jace insisted. "Your own people confirmed it contains no biological material." Takar, to Jace's surprise, intervened. "The scans did indeed show only inorganic materials. However, the purpose of such an object remains unclear." Ambassador Niara had been studying the replica with growing comprehension. "It resembles my cybernetic enhancement," she said slowly. "Though rendered in materials not typically used in functional prosthetics." "Exactly." Jace seized on her understanding. "It's a symbolic recreation, an acknowledgement of your sacrifice and continued service despite personal loss. Earth's cultural advisors believed it would be received as a sign of respect." The ambassador's skin rippled with color changes that Jace's training identified as thoughtful consideration. "An interesting cultural approach," she finally said, "though perhaps one requiring more contextual explanation than was provided." Takar lowered his security devices slightly, but maintained his vigilant stance. "The gift exchange will be suspended, pending full investigation. Commander Harper, you will surrender this object and accompany me for further questioning." "This is becoming absurd," Jace protested. "I've explained the nature of the gift. Ambassador Niara appears to understand the intent. There's no security threat here, just a cultural misinterpretation." "Nevertheless," Takar insisted, "protocol requires—" "If I may," Translator Minister Vela interrupted, her small form somehow commanding attention despite the tension. "This appears to be precisely the type of cultural misunderstanding our summit exists to resolve. Perhaps instead of security protocols, we might employ diplomatic ones." A murmur of agreement ran through some of the delegates, though Admiral Zor and his contingent remained visibly hostile. "I propose," Vela continued, "that Commander Harper be allowed to fully explain the cultural context of this gift in a formal presentation to the Summit Council. This would allow all delegations to evaluate the intent without the pressure of the reception environment." Takar seemed reluctant, but nodded slowly. "Acceptable, provided the object remains in security containment, and the presentation occurs within the next station cycle." "I agree to those terms," Jace said quickly, relieved to have a chance to properly explain before the situation escalated further. As the reception broke up, delegates clustered in small groups, clearly discussing the incident. Jace relinquished the replica arm to security and was escorted back to his quarters, though not before he noticed Admiral Zor engaged in intense conversation with representatives from several previously neutral worlds. Once alone, Jace immediately contacted Earth's diplomatic headquarters via secure channel. "We have a situation," he explained, detailing the misunderstanding and its potentially disastrous implications. "This is unfortunate," the diplomatic director responded after a long pause, "but perhaps salvageable. The cultural exchange gifts were designed as a complete set, each item relating to the others in a narrative of cooperation. Present them together, and the context might become clearer." "If they let me," Jace said grimly. Right now, half the summit thinks I'm either a barbarian or trying to sabotage the peace process. Use the misunderstanding, the director advised. Make it a teachable moment about the importance of cultural context in diplomatic relations. That's literally why we're all there. After the call ended, Jace spent hours preparing his presentation, working with Vela to ensure the translation would convey the proper nuances. The small translator seemed to find the entire situation fascinating rather than concerning. It is actually quite understandable, Vela explained. Many species present have entirely different relationships with their physical forms than humans do. The Vulcans, for instance, consider bodily integrity so sacred that even medical procedures require extensive religious ceremonies. And the Dyrenians, with their regenerative capabilities, view permanent limb loss as a profound sacrifice. So my gift inadvertently touched on deeply held cultural taboos, Jace concluded. Precisely, Vela agreed, though Ambassador Niara seemed to grasp your intent once explained. She has extensive experience with other species. And Admiral Zor? Vela's large eyes blinked slowly. The Admiral has built his career on maintaining Vulcan cultural purity. He views all misunderstandings as deliberate affronts. When the time came for his presentation to the Summit Council, Jace was escorted to the plenary hall, a vast chamber with concentric rings of seating surrounding a central speaking platform. The hall was filled to capacity, with delegates from all attending worlds present. This had clearly become the main event of the summit's opening day. The council itself consisted of 7 representatives, including both Ambassador Niara and Admiral Zor, with the others drawn from neutral mediating worlds. Takar stood at attention near the entrance, all 4 arms now equipped with different security devices. As Jace was led to the speaking platform, he noticed the ceremonial case containing his gifts had been placed on a table nearby, with 2 security officers standing guard. The council chair, a methane-breathing entity enclosed in an environmental suit, began the proceedings. We convened to address the diplomatic incident during the welcome reception. Commander Jace Harper of Earth will explain the nature and intent of the controversial object, after which the Council will determine whether any breach of Summit protocols has occurred. Jace stepped forward, conscious of the hundreds of eyes and other sensory organs focused on him. Honored delegates, he began. What occurred at the reception was a textbook example of cultural misunderstanding, the very thing this summit exists to prevent on a larger scale. The object that caused concern was an artistic replica, created to honor Ambassador Niara's sacrifice and continued service to peace. He gestured toward the case. With the Council's permission, I would like to demonstrate the full context of Earth's gift, which was designed as a complete set rather than individual pieces. After a brief consultation, the Council agreed, though Takar moved closer, clearly ready to intervene at the first sign of trouble. Jace approached the case and carefully opened it. Inside, nestled in protective material, were several objects of similar craftsmanship to the arm replica, each representing prosthetic or augmented body parts of various key delegates. Earth's gift is titled Pieces of Peace, Jace explained, lifting the items one by one. It includes representations of Ambassador Niara's arm, Counselor Thrix's ocular enhancement, Elder Makta's respiratory assistance device, and yes, even Admiral Zor's ceremonial battle scar implants. A murmur ran through the crowd as delegates recognized the recreations of various augmentations and prosthetics worn by summit participants. Each piece represents a sacrifice or adaptation made in service to their worlds. Jace continued. Together, they symbolize how we are all, in some way, transformed by our commitment to cooperation and understanding. The complete installation is designed to be displayed in the Summit Hall as a reminder of what brings us together despite our differences. He arranged the pieces on the table, creating an artistic display that, when properly presented, clearly depicted honored sacrifices rather than dismembered body parts. Ambassador Niara was the first to respond. "The intent becomes clear when seen as a complete work," she acknowledged, "though I maintain that advanced cultural briefing might have prevented misinterpretation." "I agree completely," Jace said. "Earth bears responsibility for not providing better context. We wrongly assumed the artistic nature of the gift would be immediately apparent." Admiral Zor seemed less convinced. "The presentation remains disturbing by Vulcan standards," he stated firmly. "However, I concede that deliberate provocation seems unlikely given the extensive nature of the work." Coming from the Admiral, this was tantamount to a full apology. Jace noticed several delegates relaxing visibly as the tension in the room dissipated. The council chair called for a brief recess to confer, during which delegates approached the display with cautious curiosity. Jace found himself explaining Earth's artistic traditions to a growing crowd of interested representatives. When the council reconvened, their decision was unanimous. No breach of protocol had occurred, merely a cultural misunderstanding that had now been clarified. The summit would proceed as scheduled, with the addition of a new preliminary session on cultural context in diplomatic exchanges. As delegates filed out of the plenary hall, Ambassador Niara approached Jace. "An interesting beginning to our negotiations. Commander Harper," she said, her translator conveying what seemed like mild amusement. "Not exactly how I planned to make an impression," Jace admitted. "Perhaps better than you realize," she replied. "Admiral Zor has agreed to informal discussions tonight, ahead of tomorrow's scheduled session. Your unconventional gift appears to have broken some ice, as I believe your Earth expression goes." Jace was stunned. Getting the Vocans to agree to informal talks had been a key objective that most analysts thought would take days to achieve. "Sometimes," Ambassador Niara continued, "we must see how differently we perceive the same object before we can truly begin to understand each other." In the days that followed, the summit progressed with remarkable productivity. The arm incident, as it became known, was referenced frequently, sometimes with humor, as an example of how easily misunderstandings could occur and how directly addressing them could lead to greater clarity. The informal discussions between the Dyrenian coalition and the Vulcan hegemony gradually evolved into substantive negotiations. Admiral Zor, while never becoming what Jace would call friendly, demonstrated unexpected flexibility on several key territorial issues. 2 weeks later, when the preliminary framework for a peace treaty was signed in the same plenary hall, the Pieces of Peace installation had been given a permanent place of honor at the entrance. Each delegate touched their corresponding piece, a gesture that hadn't been planned but emerged spontaneously, before signing the document. As Jace watched representatives from worlds that had been on the brink of war, now cautiously celebrating together, translator Minister Vela appeared at his side. "An auspicious outcome from an inauspicious beginning," the small being observed. "Sometimes the biggest misunderstandings lead to the most important clarifications," Jace replied. "Indeed, though I would advise against bringing replicated body parts to your next diplomatic assignment." Jace laughed. "Lesson definitely learned." Later that evening, at a small gathering to celebrate the preliminary agreement, Ambassador Niara approached Jace with what his training identified as a ceremonial gesture of respect. "Your world has strange customs, Commander Harper," she said, "but an admirable commitment to peace." "We've had enough war in our history to recognize its futility," Jace replied. "Sometimes the most valuable perspective comes from those who've made the most mistakes." "A wisdom worth sharing," she acknowledged. "When you return to Earth, please convey our appreciation for their willingness to bridge our differences, even if the method was unconventional." As the celebration continued around them, Jace watched representatives from a dozen worlds sharing food, drink, and conversation, each according to their own biological needs and cultural practices. The scene was nothing short of miraculous to someone who understood how close these same beings had come to devastating conflict. Admiral Zor approached, his formal stance slightly relaxed compared to their first encounter. "Commander," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "The treaty framework contains significant compromises from all parties." "The best agreements usually do," Jace replied carefully. "Indeed." The Admiral paused, seeming to consider his next words. "The Vulcan delegation has been authorized to discuss additional cultural exchange programs once the final treaty is ratified, perhaps with clearer advance explanations." Jace recognized the significant diplomatic opening being offered. "Earth would be honored to participate, Admiral, with comprehensive cultural briefings provided well in advance." As Admiral Zor moved away, Jace caught sight of Security Chief Takar observing the proceedings from a discreet distance. The four-armed security chief noticed his gaze and approached with formal precision. "Commander Harper," Takar said, "I must acknowledge that my initial assessment of threat potential was excessive." "You were doing your job," Jace replied graciously. "Security always requires caution." "Perhaps. But effective security also requires cultural understanding, a lesson I will incorporate into station protocols going forward." The formal peace treaty was signed 3 days later, establishing not only territorial boundaries and resource-sharing agreements, but also cultural exchange programs and diplomatic training initiatives specifically designed to prevent future misunderstandings. As Jace prepared to depart Alara 3, he took one final look at the Pieces of Peace installation, now permanently installed with additional context panels explaining its significance. What had begun as a diplomatic disaster had transformed into a powerful symbol of the summit's success. Translator Minister Vela accompanied him to the shuttle bay. "You have achieved what many thought impossible, Earth Envoy." "Not me," Jace corrected. "All of us, working through our misunderstandings rather than despite them." "A lesson worth remembering," Vela agreed. "Though perhaps next time, consider bringing chocolates instead. They seem to translate well across species boundaries without causing security incidents." Jace laughed. "I'll put that in my official recommendations." As his shuttle pulled away from the station, Jace watched Alara 3 recede into the distance, no longer a snowflake against the stars, but a bright point of light representing something precious and fragile. Understanding across seemingly unbridgeable differences. In his official report to Earth's Diplomatic Corps, Commander Jace Harper would detail the territorial agreements, resource allocations, and security protocols established by the treaty. But in his personal log, he recorded something simpler. "Sometimes, it takes holding up a mirror to our differences before we can truly see our common ground. And sometimes, what looks like a severed arm is actually an outstretched hand."